Hello, it's Tom Freeman from Sanctuary Graduates here. Thanks very much for joining. We'll be kicking off the webinar in just a few minutes. Thanks for waiting. Hi everyone, it's Tom again from Sanctuary Graduates. Thanks for joining. We'll be kicking off in a couple of minutes. Hi everybody, Tom Freeman finally from Sanctuary Graduates. Thanks for joining. We'll be kicking off the webinar in a minute. Hi, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. Afternoon and hello and welcome to the Social Mobility in Early Careers webinar. We've got a great attendance today, which is extremely encouraging for those of us for whom social mobility is so important. And it's really great to see the commitment to this topic, especially given what is going on in wider society at the moment and how it adversely affects disadvantaged communities. It's particularly pleasing to see such a range of employers from across all industries taking part today, as well as many university career services and a large contingent of D&I specialists. You're extremely welcome and many thanks indeed for watching. We'll also be live tweeting and posting on LinkedIn using the hashtag SMF Index 2020, which will be on the screen in a moment. So please use that to share your thoughts too. I'm Tom Freeman, I'm the MD of Sanctuary Graduates, and we're bringing you this webinar in conjunction with Emily Hodgson, who is the Employer Relations Manager of our partners, the Social Mobility Foundation.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here and I'm really looking forward to talking to you all a bit more about the index.
Thanks, Emily. Right, first of all, the format. I'll introduce Sanctuary Graduates as many of you may not know us that well and give you the context for the webinar. And then Emily from the Foundation will provide insights to the Foundation, to social mobility in general, and the Employer Index, which so many of you either make applications to or in the process of doing, or just thinking about making an application or wanting to know more about it. I'll jump back in periodically with some practical tips and employer examples for you to take away about how you can address social mobility from an attraction perspective and a recruitment perspective. And hopefully there is something for everyone, no matter what size your organization, nor indeed what stage you're at in your social mobility journey. It's worth mentioning that some of our clients tell us, and I'm sure many of you listening spend many, many hours a year discussing, having meetings about social mobility. And what we're attempting to do is breeze through the entire topic and the index in less than an hour. As such, it'll be quite rapid, quite high level, and to help you digest all this information and to get the resources that each of you need, we are in the process of recording this webinar, and we'll share these slides and the recording with you afterwards and via the Sanctuary Graduates YouTube page. We also invite all of your questions and we'll have some time for me to pose these to Emily towards the end. So please send them in as we go along via the Q&A function on Zoom. And I would like to introduce our moderator, Jess Booker. She's an early careers expert with experience across a range of industries and is absolutely passionate about this topic. And she'll be answering the more straightforward questions directly and also selecting some for me to put to Emily later. Okay, that's the format and the housekeeping. Before I hand over to Emily, a short introduction to Sanctuary Graduates. We are graduate recruitment experts and we've built diverse campus connections, networks, partnerships of departments, societies and students in universities right across Europe to address the early careers attraction and recruitment needs of our clients. And this takes the form of digital attraction, brand ambassadors, hard to fill roles and locations, diversity, and also candidate management, screening assessments, and everything in between for those of our clients who outsource to us. Diversity is really important to us as an organization. We're a multilingual business. We have always hired diverse talent since our inception. And many of the current leaders of the business are the first generation of their families to go to university, which is a great source of pride for me and the wider business. In addition to helping dozens of businesses with their diversity agendas, we also help students from diverse or disadvantaged backgrounds, mostly in the form of outreach, career consultations, mock assessment centres and workshops. And it's through these workshops that our partnership with the Foundation came about, as we've been running employability workshops for their undergraduate cohorts. And as we've got to know them better, it's become our mission, if you like, to maximise the exposure of this wonderful charity and their seminal Employer Index. So I hope that gives you some context to Sanctuary Graduates, our partnership with the Foundation and the webinar. So I'm now going to hand over to Emily from the Foundation.
Thanks very much, Tom. As Tom has already said, it's great to have so many of you join us today. I know we've got a range of organisations attending, some for whom social mobility will be a very new area of work, and others who may have been participating in the index for the past few years. I'm going to try and keep the content as useful for everyone as possible, but I do apologise in advance for those of you that will have heard some of the introduction to the index before. I wanted to kick off by talking about the context of social mobility and why what we do at the Social Mobility Foundation is so important, and why we think employers should be tackling this issue as well. As a charity, we've been running programmes for young people from low-income backgrounds for nearly 15 years, supporting them into competitive universities and professions. We launched the index in 2017 because we wanted to encourage organisations to widen access, but also this work should help employers find and retain the best talent. We know that talent is not limited to applicants that attended certain schools, universities, or who live in certain locations. So firstly, in terms of context, some of you will have seen these stats that I'm sharing on the screen now, but I always find that it's useful to remind ourselves of these. So firstly, the impact of your schooling. So 8 top schools in the UK send more pupils to Oxbridge than 2,900 other schools combined. And we know that those in so-called top professions and public roles are more likely to have attended these institutions. And we also know that employers are more likely to be visiting them as well as part of their graduate recruitment process. We like to think that career success is based on ability, but there is data to show that a low ability child with wealthy parents is 35% more likely to become a high earner than a high ability child from a poorer background. And then there's some stats here from Sam Freeman's book, The Class Ceiling, that some of you may have come across. And it looks at the likelihood of entering professions based on your parents' professions. And his research shows that, for example, you're 24 times more likely to become a doctor if you have a parent who is a doctor, and 17 times more likely to become a lawyer if you have a parent who is a lawyer. All of these stats really challenge the idea that the UK is a meritocracy. And what we want to work with employers to do is to ensure that your background does not determine your career success. The country's talent is spread across all classes and all locations, and we know that the current situation in which we find ourselves with coronavirus is only likely to widen that gap. So we will be talking a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on social mobility at the end. So first of all, sort of a key question for employers to ask themselves: do people enter and progress within my organisation based on their ability and their effort, or does their social background or their class affect how successful they are? If social background plays a role, which it likely will, the index helps you know what to do about it and enables you to monitor your progress. So just some key information about the index. So essentially what the index does is it ranks organisations on the effort that they are making to improve social mobility. So there's a combination here of looking at what action you're taking, and then also an assessment of whether that action is working, especially if you've entered for multiple years. One way of looking at the index is that it's an audit rather than an award. So we're not giving out prizes for the best, although the ranking is really important, but we're enabling organisations to see how well they're doing. It's totally free of charge to enter. You get a feedback report, and you can also have a feedback meeting with the SMF to go through that report as well. You can enter anonymously. About 1 in 4 organisations choose to do that. There's approximately 100 questions across 7 sections, which I'm going to go into. And you don't need to be able to answer all questions or even all sections in order to take part. So if there are sections that aren't relevant to you, don't worry, but we would encourage you to complete as much as you can. We also provide, as I've said, a detailed feedback report for each entrant, but we also provide a key findings report, which is the data across all submissions, and both of those can help you improve for the following year. So the next slide just outlines why you might want to take part. So as I've said, it's a free audit and you can enter anonymously. Lots of organisations have fed back to us that they find it useful in forming a strategy for this area of work. It also helps to track progress and keep momentum going, especially if you're entering in multiple years. Data coming out of the index indicates that clients care about this work. So 85% of last year's entrants said that their clients care about the socioeconomic diversity of their workforce. And that compares to 96% saying gender and 99% saying ethnicity. So it is catching up with other areas of diversity. Your competitors are also likely to be entering. I'll share the list of the top 75 in a moment. And crucially, it should help you find the best talent. And Tom will be sharing some of Sanctuary Grad's tips on that with a social mobility lens a little bit later on. So before I go through each of the sections, I just wanted to show you the top 75 from last year. So you can see here whether your competitors have appeared in the top rankings. There are also sectors where there is little or no representation, so engineering and life sciences, for example. If you don't see your competitors in that list, then now might be the time to think about being a bit of a pioneer for social mobility in your sector. So now on to the sort of section by section. We start with section 2, and that's because section 1 just asks for some information about your organisation. So the first section we're going to talk about is section 2, and this is around outreach and your work with young people. So most organisations are usually carrying out some sort of outreach. What we look for here is whether it is well targeted. That means, is it reaching the right sorts of young people? Have you looked at the social background of the young people you're working with? And we also look at whether it leads to better outcomes for those young people. So are you evaluating the impact of your work? And what do the outcomes look like in terms of educational achievement or career outcomes? What some employers worry about here is whether we're assessing the volume of young people you're working with. We don't actually mark based on that. It's more about the proportion of the young people you work with that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And we assess that through the schools you're working with, where the young people live, and their eligibility for free school meals or pupil premium. So 3 key things to really focus on in this section is evaluation, which I've already mentioned, your reach. So are you reaching young people in the areas of the country with the lowest rates of social mobility? These are otherwise known as social mobility cold spots. And these have been identified by the Social Mobility Commission in England. If you're based in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland and aren't conducting outreach in England, then do please include information about the schools or the areas you've targeted and why. And there's space to do that in the final question of that section, which asks if there's any information you haven't been able to cover in the questions we've asked. So some organisations here have found ways to reach young people beyond their doorstep. So that might be through e-mentoring or residential placements. Include any of that information here. And then finally, the third key area in this section is whether your outreach links to your recruitment. So are you tracking and supporting those young people into roles within your organisation or in the sector more broadly? Last year, only 12% of organisations were able to demonstrate a strong link between their outreach and their recruitment. So it is something that's hard to do, but if you are able to do it, it has a really big direct impact on social mobility. Okay, so the next section is section 3, routes into the employer. Here we look at 3 main things, so apprenticeships, internships, and graduate programmes. If you don't run some of these, don't worry, you won't be scored on them if you don't run them. On apprenticeships, we look here at whether these are offering a parity of esteem with graduate programmes and opportunities, and whether apprentices can progress at the same or a similar rate to graduates. If you offer internships, we'll be looking at whether they're openly advertised, are they well structured, are you paying your interns, and are there roles for them to enter at the end of their internships? This does tend to be worse in the creative industries and politics. Professional services tend to do quite well here, but we will be looking out if organisations are offering unpaid internships. We also do ask for quite a lot of data in this section, including details that you might have about the socioeconomic backgrounds of those that you're hiring or who are on these programmes. It's really important to include that information even if you're not happy with what it's saying. We do reward organisations in the mark scheme for knowing this information, even when you look at it, you don't think it's great. So three key things to remember in this section: include data where you have it, even if you're not happy with it. Emphasize the quality of the programs you're running. And again, here, it's not about the size of your intake. We see quite a lot of smaller organizations running really high quality programs that have good employment outcomes. And then include information you have about the progression of apprentices. So some organizations here might include case studies of success stories, or tell us a little bit about their apprenticeship progression plans. Section 4. Now, this is about attraction, and it's probably the most graduate recruitment heavy section of the index. Really, what we want to note here is how wide the range of universities you recruit from is. So our key findings report from previous years shows that employers tend to mainly be visiting Russell Group universities, and that these institutions are the least diverse in the UK, and there's a stat on the slide about that there. We don't expect you to visit all the universities in the UK, far from it, but we would encourage you to look at how you can increase the range of students you engage with. And Tom's going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So 3 key things here are, make sure if you've got plans that you haven't yet started, that you include those. So we can give marks for plans that you have in place. Do make sure you're talking about socioeconomic diversity here. So quite a lot of organisations will talk about initiatives to attract BAME or female candidates, but we specifically want to know about social background. And then finally, linked to that point, provide us with data, if you can, about the backgrounds of the young people engaging with this activity. So we really focus here on the success of the initiatives you run, not just whether you're running them. So over to Tom now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the attraction piece and their experience at Sanctuary Graduates.
Thanks, Emily. So for those of you that are thinking, okay, I understand what Emily and the foundation are looking for in terms of attraction, but how do I do this? What practical steps can I take? Of course, there are lots of approaches you could take in order to reach more students from a disadvantaged background. But here are some things that employers of any size can do to widen your reach. Excuse me. First of all is career services. Very simple. Reach out to the career services at universities where there are higher proportions of disadvantaged students. It's a really good place to start. And the main point of access is, of course, their university jobs boards. And even if posting is the only thing you do in one of your non-target, more diverse universities, it's extremely worthwhile in terms of widening your reach. And to really broaden your range of universities and to deepen the impact you have on more socially diverse campuses, you can, of course, approach specific departments in which the students that you really want to attract are studying. A good example of this is a global asset manager who we work with, who drove the socially diverse applications they were looking for by reaching students through our academic department network. And of the 750 departments who passed on their message to their relevant students, more than 1/3 of these departments were at non-Russell Group universities. And this was really instrumental in this case in getting them the diverse applications that they wanted. Events, office events, campus events, they're a great way to interact with diverse students and have meaningful conversations with them. The COVID crisis has certainly accelerated the move from physical events to virtual events. I think there's an opportunity here to reach more diverse audiences. First of all, virtual events will not involve the student fronting up any money in terms of travel expenses or take time off for travel, which often interferes with those that have work responsibilities. And these are both key factors for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Brand ambassadors, most viewers will be familiar with the concept, but perhaps less familiar with how they can be used to widen your reach and drive applications from less privileged backgrounds. Taking JLL, for example, they're a real estate services company who currently rank 4th on the employer index, which they're very proud of. And part of our attraction campaign for them, we recruited what we call social mobility brand ambassadors. This involved well, picking students, first of all, who had all the characteristics of an excellent BA, great networks, strong characters, good characteristics, and ask them to complete a contextualized tool, a test which measures the academic potential and adjusts the grades where applicable. Those of the students who received adjusted A-level results, as they come from disadvantaged backgrounds or had gone to underperforming schools, were then selected as our BAs for this campaign. And they carried out on-campus promotion to encourage students from similar backgrounds, friends of theirs, friends from home, friends from their schools, to apply to JLL. And this was instrumental in driving some of the diverse applicants that they sought. Headhunting, this is very simple, and many employers have told us they do it really effectively. And this could simply involve tracking down a number of students on LinkedIn from non-target universities with interesting profiles and encouraging them to apply. It's really simple, but extremely effective in terms of outcome. And also the students get a personal interaction with you, which can often lead to better applications. For those employers who tend to focus only on select Russell Group and sort of top universities, there are of course things you can do at the top universities, such as the getting involved in the widening participation schemes that many universities run. We support quite a few of these, and special mentions to the universities of Southampton and Warwick in particular, who run really excellent schemes, and many more besides that do. Also by sponsoring diverse and diversity societies. An example of an organisation that did this really effectively is Police Now. And they drove the applications they needed for certain constabularies around the country by promoting through many of the 100+ societies that we sponsor at a broad range of universities, including Cambridge and Bristol University Afro-Caribbean societies. A word of caution, in some, not all, but some top universities, the numbers of economically disadvantaged students are simply not there to sustain everybody's diversity objectives. There are of course super universities with fantastic students, but it's important that you widen your reach as discussed rather than just focusing on select universities. And I'm very happy to share after this webinar the university data we have with anyone who's interested. In terms of marketing, there's some very easy sort of tips on the slide there, but the key ones are showcasing the diverse talent that's at your organization. There's a lot of recent student polling that's been done that shows this is the key driver of applications from diverse communities. Also, removing linguistic barriers. There's loads of online tips about how to write with inclusive language and what words to avoid. But the important rule that we follow is that if you want to widen access, avoid inaccessible language and industry jargon. With that, I'm going to hand you back to Emily.
Thanks very much, Tom. It's really great to have those practical tips. So the next section, section 5, this is about recruitment and selection. This is one of the longer sections on the index, so I'm not going to cover everything that's in it, but some key things that we're looking for here. So we want to understand whether your recruitment process judges potential rather than academic achievement or polish. And most entrants over the past few years haven't been able to show us that they do have a recruitment process that can judge potential. This is discouraging because we would want to see this, but it's also encouraging if you're sitting there thinking, I'm not sure how we're going to demonstrate that, because sadly most organisations can't either. Organisations that do well here, though, will have been through the stages of their recruitment process and identified if there are particular stages that applicants from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are falling down on, and then are making adjustments accordingly. We also ask here a question about intersectionality. So have you assessed whether there is a double or a triple disadvantage for candidates who are from a low socioeconomic background, but who are also female or also BAME, or perhaps all three, and what impact this has? So 3 key things here. Can you provide rationale for your academic requirements if you have them? And is what you're assessing in your assessment criteria disadvantaging those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds potentially? So for example, some law firms will score legal work experience in the application process, and that's likely to disadvantage you if you don't have the networks or the contacts to secure those opportunities. And then, what adaptations have you made to the recruitment process in relation to social mobility, and are they working? And then finally, if you use a contextual recruitment system, which quite a lot of employers now are, can you demonstrate that it's working and that it's leading to greater diversity in your hires? So what will happen is quite a lot of organisations will tell us how many applicants have been flagged in the process, but aren't able to then tell us if they've then gone on to be hired. So please do make sure you include that if you can. Okay, back over to Tom now for some practical solutions on recruitment and selection.
Thanks, Emily, that was great. Yeah, just jumping in here with some very simple tips on leveling the playing field in your recruitment process to give you the outcomes that you want. You've worked so hard to attract these diverse candidates. How do you hang on to them and get the outcomes that you want in terms of hires? We recommend removing or reducing A-level requirements. It's been done a lot by a number of employers. Of course, there are some firms that have evidence or data to prove they're really necessary for success or professional qualification success. So, where the A-level criteria is still used, perhaps consider the contextualized grade tools that we've mentioned. There's of course it's where academic performance is understood in the context of factors such as the school the candidate attended, their background, and so on. Also, another popular one is a blind CV process, removing names, grades, university details from the information that your assessors some level of bias. Moving on, there was a Trendant survey last year with 71,000 students that were surveyed, and there were two interesting findings that pertain to our discussion today. One was that students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have less confidence in the recruitment process, and that they're more likely to drop out. So the key thing is, what are the most important things that we must do to give confidence to your applicants and then to reduce the dropout rates? Here are some things that can be done which encourage and maintain applications from those students and those from diverse communities. The first is sort of insights, information on your website, social media, print materials, giving people so much information that gives them the confidence required to make an application. All the information is there for which to base that decision. And also explain what you assess, and more importantly, why it's important for you to assess those things. Explain the rules to the game so that they can play the game. And also providing opportunities for candidates to engage with you to learn about your recruitment process. And this can include pre-interview, pre-assessment center calls, webinars, hints and tips documents to send out digitally to all candidates. And we also recommend specific outreach and support to those diverse applicants who are more likely to drop out or fail an assessment. Also, what we do for a number of our clients, and it's quite common practice of recent, is having someone in the team take a second look at certain applications from those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The wider context of their profile can be extremely powerful in overturning what otherwise might have been a rejection at the start of the process for someone who has really high potential and might be an asset for your business. Before I hand back to Emily, it's worth saying that if you grab a copy of the Foundation's 2019 key findings, which is available on their website, and we can share it too, there are loads more examples in there of what other employers have done to improve social mobility, a lot more information than we've been able to share today. And we've also got loads more examples we can share. So please do get in touch with us after the webinar, and we'll have all the contact details for us on the last slide. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks very much, Tom. So the next section is data. And this is probably the area we get the most questions about at the SMF. So over half of entrants to the index now ask new employees for data on their social background. And this is collected in a similar way to how you would collect data on the protected characteristics. So here we're looking at whether you are collecting that data, how many data points you're collecting, and what the completion rate looks like for new employees entering the organisation. And for existing employees as well on those questions. So you can see on the slide there the average completion rates across the index so that you can understand that benchmark. I've also listed there the questions that we would encourage organisations to ask, and we recommend collecting 3 or 4 of these. So type of school, and crucially splitting grammar and comprehensive. And the reason we tell you to do that is because children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are far less likely to attend grammar schools, even when comparing children with the same achievement at aged 11. In 2019, only 3% of grammar school students were eligible for free school meals, compared to 15% in non-selective schools, state schools nationally. Then there's parental history of higher education. So some organisations here will ask whether or not your parents attended university, or they'll ask for the level of education they achieved, so GCSEs, A-level degree, masters, etc. Some will also ask about eligibility for free school meals. And although on its own, this probably won't give you enough data, because the percentage of the population that are eligible for free school meals is low, it is a very good measure to have alongside others. Some will also ask for parental occupation, and you can use the National Statistics Socioeconomic Classification Codes for this, which groups occupations into different categories. You may have heard advice that says if you're only going to collect one data point, then collect this one, and that's probably true. But we would say that collecting multiple data points will give you a more accurate picture. That's because, for example, parental occupation wouldn't account for if you then also received a scholarship to a private school. There are government guidelines around this, so you should be able to find those online. And also the Social Mobility Commission recently produced a useful employer toolkit, which again has sort of wording around the questions that you might ask. So the next section 7, and I'm going to fire through the next two because I want to make sure we've got time for questions. So section 7 is about progression, culture and experienced hires. This is the lowest scored section of the index, so the section that organisations do least well in. Here we look at what you know about progression, retention and pay of those from different social backgrounds. And this will be quite difficult to complete if you're not collecting the data questions in section 6. So if you're new to this area of work, start with that and then maybe look at progression afterwards. If you have been doing this for a number of years, then we'll be asking you to let us know what it looks like in terms of what action are you taking and is it working. So we do monitor progress on the index. So if you repeat what you've told us in previous years, then you're not going to progress in the marking. So please tell us the action you're taking and if it's working. Last year here, we added some questions around culture. So we ask if you've assessed the culture of the organisation. That could be through staff surveys or through social mobility staff networks. And again, we're looking for what action you're taking here, depending on what that is telling you. So some organisations will run reverse mentoring programmes, and that tries to formalise some of the informal sponsorship that can take place in organisations between senior and junior colleagues, where a connection can often be formed through shared interests, which are likely to exclude people from different backgrounds. Again, it's quite often here that we see organisations talking about other areas of diversity. So make sure your answers are really focused on social mobility here. Okay, so section 8, this is around advocacy. So here we're looking at what you're doing internally to raise awareness of social mobility. Are senior leaders talking about social mobility and championing the cause? Are you sharing social mobility stories internally? We also look at what you're doing externally to encourage suppliers, clients or peers to take action. And this could be through your tender process. You could be running events with your suppliers or clients. And some organisations here also do set targets. We get quite a lot of questions about the sorts of targets that organisations are setting, and they tend to be based on data already available to them. So for example, if you know 40% of your applicants come from comprehensive schools, you might set a target for 60% the following year. Very few will be setting targets around hiring data, because that tends to move more towards a positive discrimination model, but you might want to ring fence places for students from your work experience programs on pipeline programs, or some employers are fast tracking candidates from their social mobility programs through to interview stages of their recruitment process. So that's all of the sections. As I said, I did want to touch quickly about social mobility and the impact of COVID-19. The current situation is likely to have a lasting impact, and many of you will have seen the data coming out that shows that those from poorer backgrounds will be the hardest hit. There's also likely to be an educational impact for those students that are out of school and university. So based on the sections of the index, some things that you might want to be thinking about within your organisations. So firstly, on your outreach, think about moving your programmes online if you can. So access to technology could be an issue here. At the SMF, we've surveyed our cohort of 16, 17-year-olds and found that access to laptops or smartphones is pretty good, but we suspect that's likely to reflect their age, and that might not be the case for younger children that you're working with. And just do keep that in mind where possible, and record your webinars so they can be watched on smartphone devices at a later date. In terms of your routes in, if organisations end up reducing the number of graduates they're hiring, then there is a risk that this will mean that they close the door on talent from disadvantaged backgrounds. So we'd encourage you to be careful not to resort back to old hiring methods, and just keep diversity and inclusion at the heart of what you're doing, which I know so many are. In terms of attraction, this could be an opportunity to use technology more effectively. But again, make sure you're monitoring the diversity of those that you're engaging with in this activity, and maybe partner with organisations that can help you track that data as well. On recruitment and selection, now this is quite interesting, and I think we've already had a question in the Q&A box about this. So lots of organisations at the moment will be conducting interviews by video. One of the things that did come out of our student survey is that a significant proportion of them don't have access to a quiet place to study. So this is likely to be the case for interviews as well. So make sure you're offering lots of guidance to applicants about dress code, etiquette for video interviews, but also think about training your hiring managers to be aware of the bias that might be playing a part here. So if there's noise in the background, or you're making judgments based on their home environment, factor that into your training as well. On data, perhaps use this time if you can to increase the response rates to your diversity monitoring questions, or maybe start designing the questions that you plan to ask in the future about social background. And then finally, on progression culture and experienced hires, if you can, run your diversity networks remotely. And then also think about the social activities that you're running at the moment virtually. So I know lots of organisations are planning quizzes or Zoom drinks, and just make sure that they are inclusive in the same way you would with your face-to-face social activities. So finally then, just some top tips from me. So engage senior leaders, make sure that you have support from your from the top of your organisation. All employers that I've spoken to working on this have said that that's been crucial. Data, we do ask for a lot of this in the index, and so it's important to apply an evidence-based approach. And this is also helpful in convincing people internally actually about the challenges you might be facing in relation to social mobility. I've already mentioned this, but do let us know about future plans, because we can give marks for this. And especially at the moment, if there are plans that you had that have been impacted by COVID-19, then let us know what those plans were and just explain that they maybe haven't been able to be carried out, because we will be able to reward you for that. And then again, make sure you are talking about social mobility across your answers, rather than other areas of diversity, because we can only mark based on social mobility efforts. So just make sure that you're doing that. And then finally, is it working? So make sure you're talking about it as well as the activity you're doing. You can get in touch with us if you have any questions. The deadline for submissions is the 26th of June. We have extended that by a month because of COVID-19. So yeah, just get in touch if you have any questions and we'll be happy to help. And you can register online on our website there as well. So over to Tom. I think we have some questions that have been coming through on the Q&A function. Tom.
Yes, thanks, Emily. We do. We've rattled through that at a rate of knots, and there are lots of questions coming in, which Jess has kindly moderated for us, both submitted today, and there were dozens submitted in advance. And I hope that we've covered off some of them, but there are plenty which we haven't. So thanks very much for these. Just to remind you, we're going to reply to all questions to both Emily and I in writing after the event, should we not get to your question right away today. But looking at the questions for today, so Emily, the first one we have is someone asking that, does an employer need to have their employees complete the survey before or on the same deadline as the index submission? And does the employer carry out the employee survey with our staff, or do the SMF do it?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I didn't talk about this, but we run an employee survey alongside the index. And this is a voluntary survey. It asks 8 questions about how inclusive employees feel the organisation is. So we can send you a link to the survey questions and some suggested wording, but you send that out yourselves. And the deadline is the same as the index deadline, so it's the 26th of June. To give you an idea, the average completion rate for that last year was 11%, and about a third of organisations took part. We do reward organisations for taking part, and also we do reward them depending on what that data says. And we also provide you with an analysis compared to the average across index entrants. So you get that as part of your feedback report at the end. But yes, same deadline, 26th of June.
Great, thank you. There's another question for Emily. Why do you think only 12% of employers have strong links between their outreach programs and outreach? Is this not just paying lip service to social mobility?
Good question. I think it is harder to do, to be fair to employers. I think it is hard to do, and it also depends on the age group of the young people that you're working with. So if you start working with as your outreach, if they're at primary school age or earlier on at secondary school, then that will be harder to track. But I think there's lots of great outreach work that's going on, but what's not happening is that the sort of perhaps CSR teams and recruitment, graduate recruitment teams aren't working as closely together as they could. So the organisations that are doing really well here seem to have an open dialogue between those teams, and they're making sure that the work they're doing does have a kind of direct impact on what they're looking for the business as well.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers that question. Roughly, we get this a lot actually, how long does it take to complete the index? When you're doing it for the first time, as many people listening today haven't done it before, how long do you think it will take?
I don't know, because I've never done it, but I think it really varies on the amount you're doing and the size of your organisation. And what I've heard as well is the thing that tends to take the time is gathering all the information from different areas of the business. So I think that's the first step, is just to identify who maybe needs to complete different sections and give yourself enough time to collect that information. The way the survey is set up means that you can send different sections to different people within your organisation. So if you want to send something to the CSR team or send something to the grad recruitment team, you can do that quite easily, and hopefully that helps reduce the time it takes. But you've got plenty of time before the 26th of June to get it done, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Going back to the questionnaires, another question, do you have any suggestions on how to encourage students to complete their social mobility questions in the Equal Ops questionnaires?
Yeah, so we do get this question quite a lot, but it's mainly employers asking about existing employees and how they get that completion rate up. So the completion rate for new entrants seems to be better, and that's because it's asked as part of the sort of diversity monitoring questions, which you can choose not to answer, but I think the more organisations start to ask these questions, the more likely it will feel like the norm alongside the other protected characteristic questions. Internally, what organisations are doing is really, it's around the culture and it's around that advocacy piece I talked about. So some are now running social mobility weeks, which means they use that time to really increase understanding around this topic, and then people are hopefully more likely to complete those questions and understand why. And it's really important that you tell your employees why you're asking those questions, especially if this is a new area to them.
That's great, thank you. We've got a lot of universities dialing in today and watching, which is great. And a question from one university is, how can universities collaborate with the foundation? And what can universities do to help join up with employers' approaches to attraction and diversity aims?
Question. So yeah, in terms of the foundation and the work that we do with young people, then one of the ways we partner with organisations is to run, when we can, run face-to-face visits, and we work closely with widening participation teams to do that, sort of taking them on visits across the country to universities that they otherwise might not be able to afford to visit or haven't thought about attending. And just get in touch with me. I'm going to share my email address at the end of this, so do get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with the right team at the SNF to talk to you about that. And what was the second part of the question, Tom?
The second part of the question is what universities can do to help join up with employers, i.e. what they can do in unison to help with attraction and diversity aims.
Sure, and you might have some thoughts on this as well, Tom. But I think generally one of the things that I think in our experience, there doesn't seem to be a lot of this collaboration going on. So as Tom's already mentioned, employers should, where they can, work with widening participation teams to help identify students that they can encourage to attend campus activity. And I think generally for social mobility and this work, it's important that young people are being supported at every stage. So that means school, university, and when they enter employment. And so we would encourage that collaboration where possible, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd second that, certainly. And we've noticed in the last few years just how energized increasingly career services are on this topic and how helpful some of them are being. I think the key thing is about widening access, so helping employers go a bit deeper than just the jobs boards and reaching the demographics that they want to. I'll give a lot more detail on this afterwards in the written notes, but certainly the widening participation schemes, they are gathering pace, they're improving, and some are fantastic, and employers getting involved in those, but also to career services being more open to giving further access, easier access than just simply posting on the jobs board. Powerful though it is, it may not be enough in itself for some employers. There seems to be a question here that says there's been a focus on graduates in the index, and certainly from my part, that's true. This employer offers more apprenticeship opportunities. How does this feed into their outcomes if they applied for the index?
Yeah, great question. So on the sections I talked through, so pretty much all of them will ask questions about apprenticeships alongside asking questions about graduate programs. The exception to that is probably the section 4 around attraction. But what we've done this year is we've changed the survey slightly. So if you don't run a graduate program, we'll ask you that, and then it'll skip you automatically to the next questions. And that will make it much easier for us as well to just take those marks out when we do the marking at the end. So there's lots of questions there that should be relevant for apprenticeships and graduate programs as well. So please don't be put off if you're not running a graduate program.
Great, thank you. You mentioned earlier that there's a question here that says, you mentioned earlier we will get points for any future plans. Will we also get points for any plans that were in place, but unfortunately were derailed due to COVID-19 and the lockdown? Yeah,
absolutely. So do make sure you include any information about plans that you had in place over the last few months, or also things that you are now no longer going to be able to do, but you had the kind of plan already outlined. We absolutely can reward that, and we will also be reviewing the mark scheme in light of this as well, so to see if we can kind of give some extra marks for that in the same way we would have done if it had been carried out.
Great, thank you. When will the results be published?
So we're looking at autumn, so it's likely to be October, so a similar time to last year. The timetable slightly changed because we are closing a month later because of coronavirus. So, but assuming there's no other extension to the deadline, then it should be October time.
Good stuff, thank you. Interesting question here that's just come in. Do you have a system of pairing organisations up within sectors so that they can share best practice within sectors? And are there any reports or insights available, provided that we would that would give insight into the specific industry?
Yeah, so we don't at the moment do that in terms of linking employers together, but I think it would be great if we could. One of the reasons that's more tricky is because there's some sectors that are well represented, and then, as I mentioned, others that are less well represented. So there are 18 sectors entering, but in some of those there might only be 2 or 3 employees in each section, so that would make it more difficult. One of the things we would like to do, and is an ambition for the index, is to be able to offer a sector breakdown analysis for employers, so they can then see how they compare to others within the industry. We haven't quite been able to do that yet for the reasons I just mentioned, but we really would like to do that in the future, absolutely.
Understood. Thank you. Hope that question was answered well. In terms of, there's an employer here that found that disadvantaged students tend to fall down at the psychometric tests in particular. That's something that we see very, very commonly. From your perspective, we've got our take on this, but I think the question is very much for you and the SMS perspective. How would an employer adapt or support their recruitment process for those from those lower socioeconomic groups, particularly when it comes to testing? What would you suggest that they do?
So I think, and I mean, you already do this, Tom, and we do it at the SMF as well with the young people, is if you can provide extra support to those applicants. So if you know, and it might be because you already partner with charities or organisations that have helped you find those candidates, then offer them extra support throughout that process. So that might be giving them a practice session. We try and run mock interviews with the students we work with, and also work with organisations that can give them a little bit more of an insight into how that psychometric testing works. It's also about being really transparent with those young people about that process. So we see time and time again on websites that will say you don't need to practice for these tests, and actually most people will know that's absolutely not true. You do have to practice for them. So make sure you're transparent about that with the young people, because they're less likely to know that if they haven't got anybody they can talk to or who can give them that insight and those tips. The other thing I would say here as well is just to keep reviewing it. So some organisations will have found certain parts of the process are maybe disadvantaging young people, and they've changed it, and then it's worked the following year, but maybe it hasn't worked the year after that. So keep regularly reviewing it and make sure it's still the case. Don't just use kind of one data point from one year and then say, okay, great, we fixed it. You must keep monitoring it as you go along.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think that the person who's asked the question, I think that half the battle is won in terms of the fact that you've monitored the adverse impact and have isolated where the problem is. And then what you do is, and just following on from what Emily said, what you do is, if the test is really, really important and you have to keep it, then it's about leveling the playing field, which is quite labour intensive. There are easy ways and more intensive ways of doing it, but obviously providing loads and loads of practice tips and reaching out to those students you think are going to fail. Actually, we're doing a campaign at the moment for one of the big four, and they have a brutal test towards the start of it, which to ensure that we get students through it from all backgrounds, we have a lot of outreach. So the digital documentation to explain to them where they can do the testing, how to approach the test. So for example, doing a practice just beforehand to be in the right mindset for whatever that test is, and very much reaching out to those students that are either delaying taking the test for whatever reason, or we think may struggle a little bit. So the easy bit is the digital stuff and sending out tips and hints and encouraging people to practice, and then reaching out to people and encourage them to do so, and showing them where the resources are can also be quite powerful. What is the SMS view on using the apprenticeship levy for graduate programs?
I think the apprenticeship levy is tricky because I think there are quite a lot of ways of using it, which probably wasn't what it was designed for in the first place. So we understand that employers will do that, but we would encourage you, if you can, to use the apprenticeship levy for what it was designed for in the first place, which is really access and new opportunities for employees. So some employers will now put existing employees on their apprenticeship programs. But if you can avoid doing that, then do try and make sure it's opening up new opportunities. And also one of the things we look for in the index is the kind of level of apprenticeship that you are offering. So we do encourage you to offer higher level apprenticeships. And that's because, related to the point I mentioned earlier, around making sure that they offer a parity of esteem to your graduate programs. and that they're offering the same level of progression. So yeah, we would encourage you to use them for what they were kind of intended, even if we appreciate there are ways in which you can kind of get around using them in different ways.
Great, thanks, Emily. We've got a couple of minutes left and time for one or two more questions. Here's a question perhaps for both of us, but I'll start with you, Emily. How do you suggest that we run events for this demographic without alienating them or making them identifiable by their background?
Yeah, we do get this question sometimes, and I suppose it depends what age group you are talking about, or whether you're talking once they're already at the employer. So in our experience of the programs we run with young people, they are already, fairly aware that these programs exist, and also some of them are quite passionate about the fact that they want to make sure that they have equal opportunity, and are happy to identify. Either have to identify the fact that they don't, or actually don't really identify at all, but are just really grateful to be part of that opportunity. Internally, I think it relates a little bit to the data point that it's about how far we are really on this agenda of social mobility. So there have been internal networks for BAME networks or women's networks for a number of years, and now we're seeing organisations set up social mobility networks, and I think it will just become more part of the internal culture, but it links back to the point really about your overall culture internally, and one of the ways in which you can try and understand what that looks like is through anonymous employee surveys and kind of really understanding the lay of the land first, I think. Yeah,
thank you. Really brief example for me so we can squeeze another question in. In terms of the makeup of the event, I think that the key for us, and we're doing an event at the moment for an asset manager, is not having the entire event focused on that demographic. It's by mixing it up. So, and that's true of any diversity event, frankly, is not making it necessarily specific so that people feel comfortable. So that's one way to approach it. And again, we'll give a lot more practical examples of that question in the notes afterwards. Just squeeze in another one. The index requires a 12-month reporting period. Is the 12 months fixed, or can we choose which 12 months, i.e. financial year, academic year?
Yeah, you can choose which 12 months. That's absolutely fine. Just let us know. We actually asked that question at the beginning, so you let us know which year you're planning on using. If you submitted last year, then just make sure it's the 12 months following what you did last year, so there's no crossover.
Yeah, and final question here, apart from virtual events, and are there any other ways to engage with students during these times? I've got a couple of practical examples, but again, what are you seeing from all of your members in terms of ways to engage with students at the moment when they're not in one place?
Yeah, so it largely does seem to be online, so recreating some of the content that you'd already planned, so events. Some employers now are looking at running virtual work experience programs, and that's something we're hoping to work with employers on for the young people on our program as well. I think there is a lot more information out there online generally, just to support those young people, which is great to see. So even if you can't join something live, then there should be information available on sort of employer websites and that sort of thing. I haven't seen a huge amount beyond the virtual support, if I'm honest. I don't know if you have, Tom.
Yeah, I'll be very brief here as we're coming to our 3 o'clock stop. But yeah, we have. I mean, a lot of, for example, brand ambassadors, a lot of what firms are doing now, in addition to virtual events, because they can't go onto campus but want that campus reach, is using brand ambassadors that are very adept at knowing where all their friends and peers are on social media, for example, and digitally. And so having a student effectively as your access point to those social networks in any given campus is very powerful. But again, we'll share some more information on that with anyone who's interested afterwards. That is us for time. Thank you very much, Emily, for answering those questions. Thanks everybody for giving up your time to hear more about social mobility in early careers and the index. Just a reminder that we're going to share the slides and a recording of this webinar with you all. And for each of your questions we didn't get to answering, and there were plenty and some were quite technical, Emily or I will answer these in writing and share all the questions and answers with you in the next few days. Finally, we'd encourage any of you with additional questions after the webinar for either Emily and the Foundation in terms of guidance, or for Sanctuary and my team in terms of practical initiatives in social mobility. do please get in contact with us. Details are on the screen now. We would be delighted to hear from you and very happy to share all of our free resources that we mentioned earlier. So wishing you all the best as lockdown eases and life gets back to normal. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks very much, Emily.